Welcome to TCNtalks. The goal of our podcast is to provide concise and relevant information for busy hospice and palliative care leaders and staff. We understand your busy schedules and believe that brevity signals respect. And now, here's our host, Chris Como.
Hello and welcome to TCN Talks. This is my favorite time of the month when Mark Cohen and I review the top news stories of the month. Welcome back, Mark.
Hi, Chris. Glad to be here as always. Looking forward to it.
Me as well. You ready to jump in?
Yep, you bet. So, Chris, I'm going to do something a little different with our top news stories for April. I'll review the most clicked upon stories from hospice and palliative care today, but rather than dive deeply into those, I'm going to dig a little deeper into the numbers and pull out the top stories specifically about a hospice provider. I thought that would be an interesting change of pace for us, and it relates a bit to the subject of my masterclass in communications at the end of our podcast. So there were 6 articles that ran in hospice and palliative care today in April that garnered 2,000 plus clicks, which clearly separated them from the rest of the field, as the 7th most clicked upon article received about 1,400 clicks. Here are the top 6 articles. With 2,700 clicks, the most popular story last month was a posting on the website of the Louisiana-Mississippi Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, which was reporting on a visit to the staff and volunteers of the pioneering hospice program at Louisiana's notorious Angola prison. Only 20 clicks behind that was a report in the Oncology Nursing Society Voice, which was headlined, quote, LGBTQ plus individuals have higher rates of cancer because of disparities in modifiable risk factors, American Cancer Society says. Another clinical article, the HAP Foundation conducts research study on Black Americans' experience with serious illness in Chicago, ranked 3rd in clicks with about 2,600. And right behind that was a collection of postings that Hospice and Palliative Care Today collected from the Hospice Foundation of America, NHPCO, and the Conversation Project for Healthcare Decision Day on April 16. There was a bit of a drop-off to the 5th article, which had a little among those with 2,000 plus clicks. The article on McKnight's Senior Living, mortality hospice use rates differ in assisted living communities depending on whether memory care is offered, received about 2,200 clicks. And the 6th article in this set with 2,024 clicks was another clinical article, this one a release from a consortium of academic medical centers, headlined Bereaved Parent Support Study Seeking Participants. I think it's noteworthy, Chris, to see the interest among readers of hospice and palliative care today in articles that focus on clinical issues and other subjects beyond news about hospice providers. But what articles specifically about providers, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, did see the greatest number of clicks? In first place was a roundup of executive personnel news from a couple of news sources, including announcement of a new medical director of Pathways Hospice in Fort Collins, Colorado, and a new chief medical officer at Samaritan in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And in second place, a week later, was a similar roundup of executive personnel news, this time including an announcement of a new executive director at Hospice of the Foothills in Grass Valley, California, and a new VP of Marketing Communications at Carolina Caring in Newton, North Carolina. The 3rd most viewed provider article was actually from England. The BBC reported, quote, hospice boss warns of funding challenges, unquote, a story that's been percolating for several years about the lack of direct funding for hospice providers from the British National Health Service. Next was a story that broke last month, but continued to see coverage in April. The headline, Connecticut Hospice says it can't provide home care under bill to protect healthcare workers. And it ran in the online publication Connecticut News Junkie. The proposed legislation, Senate Bill 1, would require organizations that care for people in their homes to conduct background checks on the clients and anyone in the location where care is given. The checks would include psychiatric histories, as well as checks for histories of violence, domestic abuse, substance abuse, and criminal records. The legislation, and here's a direct quote, is too broad, too unclear as to requirements, not guaranteed to achieve its aims, duplicative of other procedures required in hospice care, and contradictory to certain regulations of Medicare, unquote, says Connecticut Hospice CEO Barbara Pierce. And the fifth most viewed provider story was certainly a noteworthy one. The headline, Central Oregon Hospice sues feds over challenged Medicare claims. This ran in an Oregon healthcare newsletter, the Lund Report. As the report noted, quote, one of a declining number of nonprofit hospice providers, partners in care leaders have successfully defended the vast majority of disputed claims, but have sued to erase the rest while challenging government methods. The case could have, quote, huge ramifications, unquote, and will be closely watched. Finally, to round out the top half dozen most viewed stories about providers, there's a story we certainly would expect to find in a listing like this. The headline, King and Lake Hospice Care extends compassionate services to El Cajon community, which was a release from the Temecula, California Hospice. In sum, this is not really the list of top-click provider articles you would expect to see, Chris. I think it speaks to a decline in business-as-usual coverage of hospice providers, which reflects in large part the decline in local coverage, largely due to the decimation of local daily newspaper, newsroom staff, and the massive closures of weekly newspapers all across the country. There are, however, other news opportunities out there. Many local TV stations have increased their local coverage in response to the decline of local print coverage. There are now literally hundreds of not-for-profit internet-based newsrooms across all 50 states with a mission of filling the local or state news vacuum. And there are several state-focused healthcare news sites publishing substantive content every day. The challenge here is that they all require pitching substantive stories, not fluff and not business as usual. And there's never a guarantee that the article they publish will come out exactly the way you'd like it to. Still, it's vital for hospice providers to remain top of mind in the communities they serve. So this month's rundown of top stories ought to serve as a cautionary marker. There's more work that needs to be done here. Of course, keeping an eye on media coverage outside of your own market, whether for the type of broader stories I mentioned in the rundown at the top of the podcast, or the stories about individual providers, the news that I just spoke about. The newsletter Hospice and Palliative Care Today is an essential daily read for everyone. Hospice and Palliative Care Today, as you know, operates on a free subscription model. Advertising makes the free subscription model possible. So if you're a hospice vendor listening to this podcast, you should check it out as a cost-efficient way to reach 1,500 plus daily readers. And if you're listening to this podcast but not yet subscribed to Hospice and Palliative Care Today, you should fix that as soon as this podcast is over. Now back to you, Chris.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mark. I'm just sitting here reflecting, you and I doing this in 2023, and now having this data from Cordt and seeing what people are clicking on, I just find it fascinating. And then what I'm about ready to share, there are a few overlaps, but my purview is supposed to be from the C-suite perspective. What would I think C-suite leaders should be looking at? And so a lot of mine actually don't dovetail with that. So be interesting to see if you have any comments at the end, Mark. So I've now got my categories very consistent. And the great thing is now I also can see the percentage each month. And so my first category is mission moments. This month, that was 5%. Next is reimbursement challenges and warning signs and implications. This month, that was 8%. Competition to be aware of. This month, that was 10%. Workforce challenges. This month, that's 30%. So that was a big jump this month. There was a lot more articles either I picked up on or just seemed like there were a lot more this month. Next category is patient, family, and future customer demographics and trends. This month, that was 12%. So a lot of the shift into workforce was out of demographics and trends this month. Regulatory and political is my next category. That was 12%. Technology and innovations, that was 13%. And then I'm call this next category speed of change, resiliency, and culture, 1%. And then next is the human factor, 3%. And then just kind of my catch-all category, articles of interest I want to highlight this month, that's 4%. So I'm going to jump in. So my first category is mission moment articles, and I have flagged 3 this month. First one, I love the movie Mr. Holland's Opus, Mark. I don't know about you, but it's one of my favorite movies with Richard Dreyfuss. Actually, you kind of look like him a little bit too, Mark. But the article was about, this was in Ohio, and basically a student of his music teacher, she was passing away, and the footage that the article was kind of talking about shows this hospice worker, Joshua Woodard, singing a heartfelt rendition of How Great Thou Art to his former mentor, Mary Redmond, just days before her beautiful passing and her peaceful passing. And Mary was not only a cherished voice and piano teacher in her community, but also a vibrant member of the art scene, starring in productions like Hello, Dolly and The Music Man. And then one of those lives touched was this young hospice worker. So just a beautiful mission moment. And the next, Mark, this one was an overlap between you and I, was the article about Louisiana, Mississippi Hospice and Palliative Care Organization announcement. And so great. COVID, there was so much great movement before in Louisiana working with Angola. And that really lost traction during COVID. And seeing that now getting kind of reverberated, revitalized. And so I know there are a lot of people in the country like me that are interested in that work. So we could replicate that in other parts of the country, because we know the number of people incarcerated in our country and the aging of that population is very substantial. And then the last one in my mission moment category, North Carolina restaurant fulfills woman's dying wish. This woman was actually in West Virginia, and one of her favorite places was a North Carolina restaurant. And on her deathbed, Miss Bowers had one last wish, a pork plate from the Outer Banks restaurant, Mama Kwan's. And she wondered how to make it happen. And even though she lived 6 hours away, folks made it happen. So I thought that was a beautiful mission moment. So now into the weighty matters. And so reimbursement challenges is the next. And so had 5 total. The first one, we kind of do general to hospice. The second section is more Medicare Advantage. So home care industry slams the finalized 80-20 rule, warns agency closures are coming. And it's an interesting thing. It's kind of like MLR that they do in the insurance MA space. But this 80-20 provision says that 80% of reimbursement must go directly to wages, which is interesting if you think about it, Mark. I mean, you definitely want to pay your people 80%. But typically a business has overhead about 20%. So my guess is what they're pushing back is there's no room for margin. How do you grow your business? How do you reinvest? So it's going to be interesting to see. On one hand, you see what they're trying to do. We'll see some other articles I'm going to point out of a lot of scrutiny about how privatization, private equity coming into healthcare. And so now you see kind of some of these macro moves to try to create some type of equity and make sure the right thing is done. And you see a lot of unionization. But the 80-20 is interesting. And so the MLR is 15%. So I don't know what kind of drove them to do the 80-20, but you see these different forces that are kind of confluencing, and you see what they're trying to make right, but I don't know if the 80-20 is the way to go about it. This next one says, March goes out like a lion. And so, of course, we're in April doing April top news stories of the month. But this is one I just picked up afterwards. It says that, what's the old adage? Mark comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb, but that didn't hold true for the hospice sector. A lot of late month flurry activity. MedPAC suggested freeze in hospice rates for 2025. It would MedPAC, that was before, but of course we're going to get 2.6%. But then the CMS proposed hospice rule lays the groundwork for the long anticipated HOPE tool. And of course, then the announcement also is sunsetting the VBID demonstration.
Thank you to our TCNtalks sponsor, Delta Care RX. Delta Care RX is also the title sponsor for our April and November 2024 Leadership Immersion courses. Delta Care RX is primarily known as a national hospice PBM and prescription mail order company. DeltaCareRx is a premier vendor of TCN and provides not only pharmaceutical care, but also niche software innovations that save their customers time, stress, and money. Thank you, DeltaCareRx, for all the great work you do in the end-of-life and serious illness care.
All right, the next category, underpayer, was always keep my Medicare Advantage in there. And so there were 3 articles, How MA Plans Design Affects the Utilization, specifically around health equity. A new study found that enrollees with 0 premium MA plans, they're 3 times as likely to be non-white compared to other MA enrollees and traditional Medicare enrollees. And this was a study published by Harvard Medical School. Next is wide variation in differences in resource use seen across conditions between Medicare Advantage and traditional Medicare. Mark, I think we're going to see a lot more studies trying to push in and just make sense, because Medicare Advantage, while theoretically in the beginning it was going to save traditional Medicare money, now it's actually costing more. So now they're trying to say, well, what's the difference in the patient populations? So I found that's kind of interesting. It was actually a Health Affairs article. And then the last one in this section, CMS finalizes the 2025 Medicare Advantage rates. CMS finalized a slight decrease in MA benchmark payments for 2025. The final rule was similar to the proposed rates that were back in January, but basically they're going to get their I think about 2.45% decline in revenue. And of course, nationally, Mark, we're seeing a whole lot of say layoffs, reduction in forces, and a lot of these insurance companies, and I imagine this in response to this. Next category is competition to be aware of, and I flagged 6 articles in that section. And so the first are kind of general, and then the next ones are more kind of mergers and acquisitions. First one, hospitals cash in on private equity-backed trend. It was a really interesting play on words. They're really saying is hospitals are mimicking what you see in the private equity space, which is concierge physician care. Nonprofit hospitals created largely serve the poor, adding concierge physician practices, charging patients annual membership fees of $2,000 or more. And you can't blame them, Mark, because what they're trying to do is create almost like a diversified portfolio within their health system. But we know, I think it was Mayo, that CEO got a lot of kind of scrutiny and bad press about kind of catering to larger affluent populations. But you could see if, as a nonprofit, if you could do both, you could probably serve more of that need in the nonprofit side, because we know government rates, and most particularly in the acute care sector, are not exactly where they make their margins. So many interesting things between those 2 different worldviews, if you will. Kaiser Permanente and Town Hall Ventures to launch a PACE program called Habitat for Health. So Kaiser Permanente coming together, and they're actually going to be launching PACE programs that are going to be dubbed Habitat Health. And so Kaiser and Town Hall Ventures are coming together to actually do that. And the 2 particular markets is in California, Sacramento, and Los Angeles. And so, of course, PACE is becoming very popular throughout the country. It kind of feels like that early trajectory of hospice, and now you're seeing a lot more for-profits folks come into that sector as well. Next one is the merger and acquisition section. And so first off, analysts not ruling out Cigna-Humana merger. That'll be an interesting one to watch, especially considering the scrutiny that United Healthcare is getting about antitrust. This next one, Kaiser closes Geisinger Health acquisition, forming Risient Health. So they're coming together to create a nationwide value-based care network, and it's a new nonprofit. In the senior living space, Lutheran Senior Services and Daikin, I'd never heard of that company before, Daikin, form one of the largest U.S. nonprofit long-term care organizations. So that's really interesting. And then next, $45 billion worth of physician group acquisition since 2019. That was an actual Becker's article. All right, so that's my competition category. My next category is workforce challenges, which was about a third of them this month. And I always substratify those into 3 categories. The first category is these are articles that paint the picture of the challenge. We've talked about it many times, the silver tsunami of demand as the baby boomers are aging, and then just the sheer number of workforce that we have and the pipeline of what's producing, it just feels like the numbers are going to be really hard to match. So this first one, why are so many nurses fleeing healthcare, and how hospitals can address the problem? But when you looked at the article, it was a whole lot more of the problem than it was the solutions. But fear not, we have a lot of solution articles this month. Next one is top factors in nurses ending healthcare employment between 2018 and 2021. Really good article. Top contributing factors leaving were planned retirement, that was about 39%, burnout, 26%. That just hurts my heart. Insufficient staffing, 21%. Family obligations, 18%. And so that was an interesting article. That was in JAMA. All right, so my next category under workforce is then the implications of the issue. Providence employees awarded a $98 million in wage suit. The jury awarded more than $98 million in Providence Health and Service employees in a class action lawsuit over claims the health system illegally denied meal breaks and pay for time worked. Next article, they work 80 hours a week for low pay. Now California's early career doctors are joining unions. Mark, I know you probably remember this because Delney is the one who taught me this. Where the doctors go is where healthcare will go. Like, watch the doctors, the influence that they have in healthcare. And, doctors being salaried employed has been relatively new compared to my 30 years. You've got more. But now seeing some of these even younger career physicians joining unions. And so that feels new, Mark. Have you ever seen that?
I had just left Jackson Memorial in the mid-90s when the residents there first started to talk about unionizing. So it's been driven. There have been resident driven efforts going back more than 20 years in major metro areas. And you're just seeing more of it now with the corporatization of healthcare. But it was radical back, then, because that was the first time residents had ever done it. And now it's a little more common.
Yep.
And it's understandable given the hours they work, the pay they get, the debt load they carry, and the lack of resources that teaching hospitals have to cushion some of those burdens.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, got a good article that's going to point to some of that in just a little bit. So can continue on next one. Fraudsters sentenced in scheme that distributed 7,600 phony nursing diplomas. Again, I put that under implications because you could almost see the temptation because of the lack to create a diploma mill. And that was this was in providers that ended up in Ohio, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Texas. And Mark, I think you were the first one to kind of bring that whole thing to my attention. That was a McKnight's article. Next is major unions, including SEIU, maintain momentum following the 2023 strike upswing. And so obviously that's continuing into 2024. This is an interesting one that was kind of scratching my head, Mark, and I've got a theory about this one. RNs are moving away from home health and hospice. Federal survey reveals. Though the number of registered nurses continues to grow, fewer are working in home health and hospice compared to years past. In 2018, there were 179,509 RNs, and now there are 173,808. Here's my theory, Mark, and this looks like the data was from 2022 versus 2018, so a 4-year swing. I think that you're seeing, because of the reimbursement challenges, home health is further down the life cycle, and so they're getting lots and lots of consolidation. MA is not good at all for them because they get a per visit basis. I wonder if they were able to get the data between home health and hospice. I would think hospice is growing because there are more and more people getting hospice care, but maybe it's more on the home health side where that shrinkage was, because it's kind of a head scratcher. We know healthcare is moving into the home, so it just feels very counterintuitive. Do you have an opinion on that one?
Well, I think part of it is I guess the question is how are they categorizing LPNs, LVNs, and the I want to know that answer before I would offer an opinion on it.
Yeah, it was actually a McKnight's article, so maybe we'll dig into that a little bit later. And it looks like so HRSA, it was McKnight's article, but HRSA was the actual data source on that. Because again, that's just counterintuitive to me. To me, there are a lot more people going into care into the home as a whole. But then I wonder, even if they do hospital at home, I guess they put that at the hospital, even though that's care in the home. So that may be kind of interesting. Another thing that may be working during that time as well. It shows you the time that we live, right? Those old little categories get really blurry now whenever you got hospital at home. That's not exactly acute care facility. All right, my next category in the workforce is the solutions. And this month there were 11 articles under solutions, which is great because that's exactly what we need. First one was an AMA article, 5 steps to cutting the red tape that adds to doctor burnout. Mark, so you were talking about that a couple moments ago. Number 1, identify the regulatory burdens. Do something about that. Number 2, sort and prioritize the issues. Number 3, clarify the confusion, then make the dang changes that need to be made, and then quantify the impact. And so reducing burnout is essential to high quality patient care and a sustainable healthcare system. And AMA is measuring and responding to physician burnout, helping to drive solutions and interventions. So that was good. And I think I got another one a little bit later. 2 federal bills look to boost the pipeline of healthcare workers. That also is a McKnight's article. And so welcome back to the Healthcare Workforce Act is meant to address the shortage of healthcare workers across the country. Specifically, the legislation would help intentionally educate healthcare workers to overcome barriers to working in the United States. And there is no doubt that smart what's the word I'm looking for? It's not navigation. What do you call that? Where people come to our country, come to work?
Immigration.
I kept wanting to say migration. I knew that wasn't the word. That's going to have to be part of the equation. And when you look at just the birth rate in the United States, just the numbers just don't work. And so we're going to have to address that. And I remember when I brought it up at a national meeting, and I remember getting some really weird looks. But now you're starting to see it on like presentations and a lot of the national conferences and helping healthcare organizations know how to navigate that.
It's as long as the current quotas exist on worker visas for foreign workers, we're never going to get out of that mess because there just are not enough slots. And no matter what healthcare as a whole does to try and get its share of the available visas, it's still not going to be enough. So, and half of Washington is against expanding those worker visa programs.
Well, just like you and I's great conversation, like Mark, I think I told you before, I don't know what my politics are anymore because I'm more of a solutions-based person. And so when we talked about, was it the Hill-Burton Act? That was the act, right, for the critical access hospitals. We'll come back to that at the end. There's an interesting article talking about critical access hospitals. But what a great example of making investments in communities that the tail was probably 50 years. And so people that are commonsensical. I was talking to Judy Lund-Person. We had her on our podcast, and we were talking about the political environment when hospice became a benefit. And Tip O'Neill and Bob Dole and Ronald Reagan, and just, they, at the end of the day, they came together to get solutions done as opposed to the political kind of, I know politics is always somewhat of a blood sport, but it seems like it's just become more about, it's almost like the MMA fighting ring, and that's the entertainment as opposed to getting stuff done. But we digress. Next up, physician coaching by professional trained peers for burnout and well-being, and is actually a randomized clinical trial. It's a JAMA article. In this randomized clinical trial, there was 138 physicians. They received 3 months of coaching by professionally trained physician peers. Those folks that were coached in that way had a significant reduction in their interpersonal disengagement and burnout, and they improved in their professional fulfillment and work engagement. So like when you were talking about physicians earlier, Mark, and just the challenges of why you see them unionizing, you're seeing a couple of people actually work on the core of the problem, which is great. And then here's an interesting article, How to Become a Nurse Later in Life. Embarking on a career in the nursing field later in life is an inspiring journey that many individuals choose to undertake, whether it's a personal passion or a long-held dream. And just really great article. And then Cordt had some editor notes there about just challenging hospice and palliative care folks. Do they partner with their community and university and maybe really being a little bit more proactive in this area, which I think is very innovative thinking. Next was ladders and lattices provide career opportunities for CNAs, which is brilliant, especially as we think about more diversity in our workforce. And so creating career ladders for those at the CNA level to work through to maybe become an LPN, an RN, potentially an administrator, or even later a nurse practitioner, PA, even maybe a physician going to medical school. And so that was a great article in McKnight's. Couple more, improved onboarding processes could boost worker retention. And just talking about the better onboarding process. In fact, we had Quint Studer on our Anatomy of Leadership podcast, and Quint had some great little examples in there of things, tactics to do in the upfront first interactions of staff and the orientation program, etc. Next is frontline burnout in healthcare. A growing crisis demands action. And of course, reason why I pointed this one out is they had solutions: investing in leadership, elevating employees' voices, investing in team members, empowering frontline leaders, enabling meaningful engagement, elevating the employee's voice, listening, but also taking action, investing in team members, and then investing in our healthcare workforce. And see, a couple more. Optimizing RN responsibilities is more essential than staffing hours. In other words, enabling RNs to practice at the very top of their license and taking tasks off of them that create friction, mindless work, etc. This is where technology should be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Fostering respect and appreciation seen as keys to retaining direct care workers. And then the operational advantages of hiring seniors to provide home care. And then one last one in this section, the workforce management playbook. How Mercy is empowering nurses, saving premium labor costs, plus they're improving care. So it's great to see 11 articles on the solution side this month. Next category is patient, family, future customer demographics and trends. This was, at first I thought it was a mistake, like that one time, Mark, of you picked up an older article. But apparently Cordt did this one on purpose. It was JAMA 1924. Editor's note, yes, this article's original date is 1924, 100 years ago, shortly after the Spanish flu pandemic. Modern hygiene has been described as the reaction against the old fatalistic creed that deaths inevitably occur at a constant rate. Study of vital statistics shows there's no iron law of mortality. The New York report states that the increase in the expectation of life has been almost entirely confined to the ages, hold your seats for this, before the age of 35. In the future, the health officer must, of necessity, consider steps to be taken to minimize the mortality among those of middle and advanced life. And there's much to encourage man today to seek to secure a normal lifetime. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Next is change in long-term care. Nursing homes across the U.S. are closing. According to an American Healthcare Association website, more than 1,000 nursing homes, 1,000, have closed since 2015. So pretty concerning trend there. Next, $1 billion class action settlement will trigger transition of 2,400 nursing home residents to other settings. That was really concerning. It was a class action lawsuit. So imagine 2,400 nursing home residents. That's kind of the implications of that class action lawsuit. This is interesting. Home care sees the largest price jump in history because of inflation. The cost of home care rose faster than ever in the last year, far outpacing inflation across every other healthcare spending sector. And I've got a theory about that one, Mark, because home care is one of the few where they actually can control the prices. Whereas the rest of us within healthcare, we've got inflation and the government gives us a 2.6% increase. Really hard to stay in business if that's the case. The next is healthcare on the brink, navigating the challenges of an aging society in the United States. We've talked about that many times, but just the challenge of the silver tsunami. This one is America's population ages. Women are more shouldering the burden as primary caregivers. 1 in 6 Americans is older than 65, and number is projected to rise to 1 to 4 by 2050. But the key is that most of that caregiving burden is falling on women, and it speaks that they're really like the unseen cost of caregiving throughout the country because family members are stepping up, either pulling them out of the workplace, etc. And then this last one, it's a Global Medical Tourism Report 2024. Medical tourism has been touted as the next big thing for many years. It refers to the practice of individuals traveling across borders to receive medical treatment and healthcare services. This global phenomenon has gained significant traction in recent years due to various factors such as cost savings, high-quality healthcare facilities, and accessibility to advanced medical treatments. All right, next category is regulatory and political. I have about 7 articles in this category. Breaking news, Labor Department announces final overtime rule. If you don't know what this is about, you really need to check it out. They're now moving the threshold of what can actually be a salaried employee versus an hourly employee. There's a lot that came out related to who you call a contractor. And so more than we have time to cover today, but something you definitely don't want to miss. Next, under regulatory, examining how improper payments cost taxpayers billions and weaken Medicare and Medicaid. And this is a HHS inspector testifies for a U.S. House committee talking about how OIGs work to address improper payments in Medicare and Medicaid. Next, private equity proposed Health Over Wealth Act. What this means. There was an actual hearing and talking about bill would require PE-backed or other for-profit owned providers, such as hospitals, hospice, nursing homes, certain facilities, to annually report to HHS on all manner of things, including but not limited to, and then the article actually goes through that. So certainly a lot more scrutiny about kind of that for-profit, private equity kind of play in healthcare. This next one, navigating new requirements in the 2025 proposed hospice rule. Whole lot in that new rule that just came out, which would probably be finalized around August-ish. It's past time for an upgrade to the Medicare hospice benefit. This was a Health Affairs article, and Cordt, as the editor, had a good note at the end, said many hospices have used Jimmy Carter's one-year anniversary as a marketing tool, that hospice is not really for those on the brink of death. Many, if not most of those articles were not transparent, identifying any type of recertification, decertification, or the revocation processes that make it hard for people to get the full care that President Carter had. And then
an aside on that article, Chris, I actually filed that article away as a keeper because it was a great example of how horribly written many clinical journal articles are. If you just pull that out and try and read it, and every other sentence begins with a standalone adverb. However, additionally, finally, additionally, it is just, and the amount of jargon, it is just impossible for a non-automaton, a human being, to read that article. It's really atrocious, and it's something that I plan to show to people that I mentor on writing as to why everybody needs a good editor. And just because you have an advanced degree in healthcare or law doesn't make you a great writer. I mean, some of the worst writing I've ever seen has been in medical journals and in legal briefs. And there's a reason for that. But for those people who flagged that article, take a look at it and read it not as a hospice professional or a practicing clinician, but read it as a human being absorbing the words, and see if you can actually follow the thing. It's really bad.
Sounds like a good masterclass.
Great content. You just can't get, it's just a challenge to work through it.
Yeah, that's really good, Mark. Sounds like a future masterclass for you.
Yeah.
All right, so just rounding out this section, proposed hospice rule offers key quality improvement changes experts offer. And so this is all related to the 2025 hospice payment update. And then last, again, Mark was the original one to bring this to my attention. Hospital charity care falls short of nonprofit tax breaks. And this was actually a Modern Healthcare article. Next category, technology and innovations. And so I think I had 8 articles here. 30 systems sign on to the new effort to advance age-friendly care. This actually was like a nationwide collaborative, basically, and figuring out how to, this new collaborative through the Institute for IHI, so Institute for Healthcare Improvement, aims to accelerate the adoption of age-friendly care for older adults. Next article, VR off a smartphone. Tech breakthrough could allow seniors to do away with clunky headsets. And just talking about how VR and the application and utilization by seniors and what that could actually bring. There's a friend of mine who's about ready to publish or has just published a book about the utilization of VR in lieu of pain drugs, and actually have some really good data behind that. Next, modern ultrasound tech benefits extend from Alzheimer's to palliative care. This is something that hit my radar screen almost maybe 8 years ago, but putting an ultrasound in the hands of a clinician in the field, and what that does, as opposed to just the old stethoscope, you literally could look inside folks, and then how you could utilize that. So that's a really great article. We're going to see a lot more of that, I predict, in the future. And then hopefully we could keep people out of the hospitals, and also in very, very high costs, bringing them in for CAT scans and MRIs, et cetera. Telehealth effective in supporting rural caregivers. And so all talking about better utilization of telehealth. The USDA Rural Development accepting application for grants to fund high-speed internet and digital equipment for rural and tribal communities. If we don't do that, there are a lot of the rural where you have so many healthcare deserts, pharmacy deserts, et cetera. And so getting that is going to allow people to get high-quality healthcare anywhere. This is a good one, Mark. The iconic stethoscope is getting a 21st century makeover. And really, that's where the ultrasound, which to me is brilliant marketing, like the stethoscope is getting redesigned. Effectively, it's this ultrasound that they're putting in the hands of folks. The FDA approves an AI tool that could detect sepsis. Just had a family member went through a situation, and so utilizing AI to detect sepsis sooner. And then last in this section, palliative care could be a game changer for public health. All right, my next sections are much briefer. The speed of change and resilience in reculture is the section. And then Lens X, a practical approach to taking care of your people. This was in the Journal of Character and Leadership Development. Kudos to Cordt and David Levy, who Cordt is introducing me to. I'm looking forward to going to have a conversation with him. Good chance we're going to have him on the Anatomy of Leadership podcast later this year. He's a professor of management leadership at the U.S. Air Force Academy. And so talking about leadership is about taking care of your people, and what that means in practice is a really great article about leadership. Next category, the human factor. I had about 3. Longevity. Why we're all so focused on living longer instead of living better. So quality of life is what's being called out in that one. This next one, living to 100, making Maryland a blue zone. And so article about Marylanders and how they're focused on some more blue zone communities. And then last one in this section, non-healthcare nuances that defy simple criticisms. Those who work in healthcare should be proud of the distinct role we play in our communities and society. Beyond all the numbers and details, it's important to understand that healthcare is deeply human and personal. We're all potential patients, and many of us have already been. And then the article goes on for Dowling's 9 differences and distinctions specifically for nonprofit healthcare. All right, and then my last one is just more of Chris's catch-all. Just had 2 here. Home healthcare market is projected by 2028 to be worth $383 billion. So obviously care in the home is talking about skilled care, rehab therapy, hospice, palliative care, respiratory therapy, infusion therapy. In other words, all of those healthcare services shifting into the home. And then the last one, I alluded to this earlier, a popular healthcare myth debunked. This is paradoxical. This is Becker's article, Mark. It's many in the healthcare industry assume rural hospitals are inherently worse off financially than urban hospitals. But a Kaufman report refutes the financial divide between rural and urban hospitals. This is where it's interesting, right? You just go with the headline and actually have to read the article because I'm like, what? This doesn't compute. And so the firm found no statistically significant difference in average operating margin. And just basically goes on. But yeah, if I've got a margin off of $5 billion versus 300, well, probably more like 100 million or even 20 million, that's 50, a big difference. Right? Whereas the cost of a hospital, well, yeah, maybe it might cost a lot more in a metropolitan area, but that's not the same ratio. So it is, I guess you're almost kind of saying, well, cutesy, isn't this interesting? The margins are the same. But this one really reminded me of what you pointed out about the Hill-Burton and just what that meant for communities. And when you've got margins on such a smaller pool of dollars and you can't reinvest in that physical plant, it really makes it hard for those hospitals to stay in business.
And it also matters whether the state has expanded Medicaid.
Yes, quite a bit, which, yeah. All right, Mark. Well, that's it.
And it matters whether happens to be a rural area that has commercial industry, which means paying patients with commercial insurance versus being totally dependent on Medicaid if Medicaid's been expanded in Medicare in a market. So there's a lot of variables there. So you're right. It can make for a sexy headline, but how much there is really there. So
I guess
I was. I believe that the best hospice marketing is storytelling. And so I was disappointed when you said that your mission moment stories comprise 5% of the articles that you tabbed for this month. We really need to do a better job on that all across the sector, for-profit, not-for-profit, multi-site, sole site. It's really, we're in danger of losing that which makes hospice different by failing to tell those stories, like the story about the woman in Virginia who craved the barbecue from North Carolina.
That is very well said.
Yeah. And I did want to, the late career switchers article was really interesting. Before I got into healthcare, I was in Miami. I was working in banking. That was when both Pan Am and Eastern Airlines went down. And Miami was the headquarters for both, and it had a huge economic impact. And there was some combination of city, county, state, and federal funding that went into retraining as many of those laid off employees as was possible. And several years later, I find myself at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and I'm working with the media on a story regarding a pediatric patient in the pediatric ICU. And there was a husband and wife team of middle-aged nurses working the PICU at Jackson Memorial, and they were both former airline flight attendants. One was at Pan Am, one was at Eastern. They figured that would keep the family income safe, and they both ended up getting laid off, losing their jobs and their employers within the space of about 18 months. And they both went to retraining, and they both decided that it would be a natural fit, middle-aged, to go from flight attendant to nurse, and they were both highly regarded and highly respected nurses in that unit. And PICU is obviously not the easiest nursing job to do, both in terms of the medical challenges as well as the challenges in supporting the patient and supporting the families. So those programs do exist. They've been proven to work for 40 years. And I think in a lot of areas, we've probably taken our eye off the ball of some of that. But healthcare, all of healthcare could probably do a better job of advocating that when there are significant industrial shifts, that healthcare ought to be a welcoming next stop for people in their career ladder.
Those are two incredible points, Mark. I'm going to, with the interest of time, I want you to get to your master's class, but those are two, like if I do a like highlight exclamation point, those last 2 points are incredible. You want to take us to our master's class?
It's a little brief this month. Our master class in the last couple months is focused on marketing, so I thought it'd be good to pivot back to public and media relations this month, Chris. And rather than do a deep dive on a single aspect of hospice public and media relations, I'm going to cover a couple of quick hits, tips that used to be part of the standard public relations playbook a generation ago, when nearly every mid-size and large-size hospice provider had an experienced public relations staff on board. But these things have gotten somewhat lost as hospices have had to downsize their communication staffs, often collapsing public relations under marketing, development, or even human resources. As local media in many markets have decreased, often significantly, their healthcare coverage, I find many hospices have taken their eye off the ball. But you never know when a reporter, perhaps a reporter from outside your immediate market, may come a-calling. It could be good news, a roundup of every 4- and 5-star provider in a state, or every provider with an inpatient care center, or a provider with a home-based palliative care program. Or it could be bad news, a roundup of 1- and 2-star providers in your state, or a lawsuit out of left field from a whistleblower or a disgruntled employee. In such an event, Reporters not familiar with your hospice need to know how to quickly reach someone with responsibility for media relations. So take a look at your website and ask and answer the following questions. Do you have a newsroom tab on your website? Is it buried 3 layers down? Or does it have its own button or menu item on your home page? If it takes a reporter more than one click to discover how to contact someone when that reporter has a question or is requesting a comment, you're starting off on the wrong foot with that reporter. Does your newsroom page have up-to-date contact information for whoever has frontline responsibility for media relations? And finally, is the About Us information on your website up to date? Because the reporter is going to scoop that up and throw that in the story if the reporter needs background. Even those hospices with limited media relations operations are still interested to some degree in hospice coverage. That's why they're listening to us every month, Chris. Hospice and palliative care today, of course, is the preeminent resource for all hospice decision makers, thought leaders, and the staff who support them. And the online trade publications like Hospice News, Home Health Care News, and McKnight's Home Care Daily are both useful and timely for media monitoring and free. But many media relations staff and even hospice leaders do go above and beyond that. For many, it's setting up a few news alerts on a search engine like Google. When I was producing Hospice News Today, I had about 80 active searches on Google that were executed throughout the day. Others with a budget for news monitoring may have the opportunity to engage a paid media and web monitoring service like Cision, Nexus, Meltwater, Talkwalker, and a handful of others. I myself enjoyed Nexus access for more than 30 years in my career in healthcare public relations. But regardless of how much or how little effort one puts into media monitoring, you'll get much better results if you employ a tactic called Boolean logic searching instead of using simple words and phrases. Boolean searching, it's spelled B as in boy, O-O-L-E-A, N as in Nancy. Boolean allows you to dig deeper and receive much more focused results. It may sound scary, especially with that word logic attached, but you can master the basics really in about 15 to 30 minutes. You can do a search for something like, quote, how to use Boolean logic search, unquote, on Google and find tons of help online. Or you can ask a librarian or someone with a library sciences degree to lend you a brief hand. It's well worth the effort and will pay dividends with more productive results at a fraction of the time required to sift through the results that you get. That's our masterclass for April, Chris. Some of the work I do as a communications consultant involves mentoring and assisting one-person hospice, public relations, and media relations staff. Anyone looking for that kind of help is always welcome to give me a call. I'd love to hear from them.
Perfect, Mark. Well, thank you. And I'd never even heard of Boolean logic searches until you and I did an extended play. It was probably well over a year ago. It's probably a year and a half ago. And then lo and behold, one of our incredible docs we work with longtime, his daughter had a library science degree, and we actually brought her into our team, and she actually did a training on Boolean logic searches. So thank you. We now have her available as a contractor via Teleas. So if you need a class in that, reach out to us, and we now have a great resource.
That's great.
Always a pleasure, Mark. Thank you. And I love this quote because it really does kind of show just the work that Mark and I are doing together. And we really appreciate the work that Cordt and his team are doing now at Hospice and Palliative Care today. And so to end our talk, this is a George Eliot quote. Great things are not done by impulse, but they're done by a series of small things brought together. Thanks for listening to TCN Talks.